Welcome back. In this video, we're going to further explore how Java handles complicated conditional statements. To begin with, let's write a very simple Java program. We'll start by importing java.util so that we can get some user input via a scanner object. And we'll link that scanner with the system.in input stream so we can use this window down here. Once we've done that, we're going to need to get and store some input from the user. So let's create a new string and assign its value to whatever the user gives us. To keep things interesting, let's give ourselves two more string variables to work with. We'll call them S1 and S2. We'll assign the value of our first string variable to ABC and the value of our second string variable to just Z. Because this video is about conditional statements, we're probably going to need one of those. So let's create an if-else block. Here's where we'll evaluate our conditional statement, and we'll set ourselves up some output so we can see what's going on. If our conditional statement evaluates to true and we enter this portion of the block, let's simply print out true. And if the conditional statement evaluates to false and we skip this portion of the block and instead enter the else portion, we'll print out false. Now, it's probably time to write our conditional statement. Let me introduce you to a new string function, the contains function. The contain function takes as input a sequence of characters, of which a string qualifies. And as output, it gives us a Boolean value, which means it will either output true or false. So, our if statement should understand the result of this function and evaluate to the same. To test out our program, let's start really simply. We'll provide our contain function with the value stored in string 1, which is ABC. So if we run our program and provide it with ABCDEFG, which does contain within it the string ABC, we get the true result, because input.contains evaluates to true, and we enter this portion of our if-else block. If we were to run and provide some gibberish that does not contain the string ABC, we instead enter the else statement of the block and return false. Nothing too crazy there. But let's say we wanted to make our program a little more complicated. What if we want to check and see if our input string contains both strings S1 and S2? There's a couple ways to do this, and we'll take a look at some others. But probably the simplest for our purposes is to use a complex conditional on this line. Java allows us to evaluate multiple true or false statements, or Boolean objects, at once, using the AND or the OR conditional operators. The AND operator gives us a true result when all conditionals compared with the AND operator have evaluated to true. The OR operator will give us a true result when any of the conditionals compared with the OR operator evaluate to true. In our case, we want to know if our input string contains both the contents of S1 and the contents of S2. So we're going to use the AND operator. This operator works by simply providing two conditional statements on either side of it. So we're going to run our input.contains function on both string 1 and string 2. If this function and this function both evaluate to true, our conditional statement will be true as well. Let's run our program. The string ABCZ should evaluate to true in both cases. And when we press enter, we see that that is in fact the case. Were we to provide only the valid string Z, we get a false result because our AND operator evaluates false and true, which evaluates to false. Were we to use the OR operator, this string here would in fact give us a true result because we only need one of these functions to return true now. Boolean logic can get pretty crazy pretty quick. For example, we can put at the end of our Boolean condition here the statement and false. True and false in Java are keywords. In fact, they're explicit values, just like a number or a single character would be. The keyword true evaluates to true, and the keyword false evaluates to false. Any single conditional statement ANDed with false will always evaluate as a whole to false. But curiously, if we return to our original statement here and run this program, providing it with the most valid possible input, we're going to get the true result. That's interesting because if Java had chosen to evaluate this statement and then the AND false statement, we would have gotten a false result. But instead, Java seems to have chosen to evaluate this statement and then the OR statement. This can make things confusing pretty quick. Fortunately, just like in algebra, we can ask Java to do operations in a specific order. We do this by surrounding blocks of our code with parentheses. Blocks of code within parentheses will evaluate before Java leaves the parentheses to evaluate against something else. So, after we've surrounded our OR statement with parentheses, we're now computing the OR statement and then ANDing that result with false. We will now see that our program always evaluates to false here. So complex conditionals can get pretty complicated pretty quick. If we come across something like this in code, especially if it's code that we haven't written, it can take us a good while to figure out exactly what's going on. To help us with this, we have the Boolean variable. Boolean is a primitive type in Java, and a variable of the Boolean type can have only one of two values. It can be either true or false. We can set the value of our Boolean variables to be any conditional statement. So, if we wanted to simplify how our code looks in the actual if statement, we could go ahead and store these Boolean values before we actually evaluate the if statement, keeping everything much more compact and readable. That's the nuts and bolts of complex conditionals in Java. Remember that the name of the game is keeping our code as simple and readable as possible. A really long conditional might feel great to write, but oftentimes there's a more elegant solution. See you next.